Welcome to East of Eden Readings. I'm your chief consultant, Reverend Rock, here to oblige you on your unique journey through the self-discovery. And tonight, we're going to discuss transcendence. The transcendence of yourself, your consciousness, the merging of your unconsciousness with your consciousness. And I'm going to be quoting out of the book, Man and His Symbols, by Carl Gustav Jung, a Swiss psychologist who followed under the tutelage of Sigmund Freud and psychoanalytical psychology. I'm going to begin by quoting from the chapter, The Realization of the Shadow. And I quote, "Whether the unconscious comes up at first in a helpful or negative form, after a time, the need usually arises to readapt the conscious attitude in a better way to the unconscious factors, therefore to accept what seems to be criticism from the unconscious. Through dreams, one becomes acquainted with aspects of one's own personality that for various reasons one has preferred not to look at too closely. This is what Jung called the realization of the shadow. He used the term shadow for this unconscious part of the personality because it usually often appears in dreams in a personified form. The shadow is not the whole of the unconscious personality. It represents unknown or little known attributes and qualities of the ego aspects that mostly belong to the personal sphere and that could just as well be conscious. In some aspects, the shadow can also consist of collective factors that stem from a source outside the individual's personal life. When an individual makes an attempt to see his shadow, he becomes aware of and often ashamed of these qualities and impulses. He denies in himself, but can plainly see in other people such things as egotism, mental laziness, and sloppiness, unreal fantasies, schemes and plots, carelessness and cowardice, inordinate love of money and possessions. In short, all the little sins about which he might previously have told himself, that doesn't matter. Nobody will notice it. And in any case, other people do it too. If you feel an overwhelming rage coming up in you when a friend reproaches you about a fault, you can be fairly sure that at this point you will find a part of your shadow of which you are unconscious. It is of course natural to become annoyed when others who are no better criticize you because of shadow faults. But what can you say if your own dreams and inner judge in your own being reproach you? Now I'm going to move on to the next chapter entitled The Enema, the woman within. The enema will be represented as the unconscious part of a man's psyche. See, you must understand that consciously we as heterosexual men have an image to uphold as to be masculine that was bestowed upon us since we were little children. And so our conscious mind is represented by a male ego, a hero, for a lack of better term. But our ego consciousness is only reflective of our unconscious. So if our conscious is masculine, thus our unconscious is what? Feminine. And is represented by a woman. And is called by Carl Gustav Jung the enema, which is Latin for woman. Or, Latin for soul. Difficult and subtle ethical problems are not invariably brought up by the appearance of the shadow itself. Often another inner figure emerges, If the dreamer is a man, he will discover a female personification of his unconscious, and it will be a male figure in the case of a woman. Often the second symbolic figure turns up behind the shadow, bringing up new and different problems. Jung called its male and female forms the animus and the enema. The enema is a personification of all feminine psychological tendencies in a man's psyche, such as vague feelings and moods, prophetic hunches, receptiveness to the irrational, capacity for personal love, feeling for nature, and last but not least, his realization to the unconscious. It is no mere chance that in olden times, priestesses, like the Greek Cyril, were used to fathom divine will and to make connection with the gods. A particularly good example of how the enema is expressed and inner figure in a man's psyche is found in the medicine men and prophets, shamans among the Eskimo and other Arctic tribes. Some of these even wear women's clothes or have breasts depicted on their garments in order to manifest their inner feminine side. The next chapter, the animus, the man within, again, so if the heterosexual female has to proclaim femininity and and her persona, which is the mask that we put on, which is the Greek term for person. The persona means literally mask in Greek, and so for her to put on that feminine persona through her consciousness is going to, the shadow side is going to be masculine, because it's all about balancing consciousness with consciousness. That's the sacred marriage, to unify those as one in character building, to envelop the perfect personality. So the female unconscious is, of course, masculine. The male personification of the unconscious in women, the animus, exhibits both good and bad aspects, as does the enema in man. But the animus does not so often appear in the form of erotic fantasy or mood. It is more apt to take the form of hidden sacred convictions and beliefs. When such a conviction is preached with a loud, insistent masculine voice or imposed on others by means of brutal emotional scenes, the underlying masculinity in a woman is easily recognized. However, even in a woman who is outwardly very feminine, the animus can be an equally hard and exorable power. One may suddenly find oneself up against something in a woman that is obstinate, cold, and completely inaccessible. One of the favorite themes that the animus repeats endlessly in the remnants of this kind of woman goes like this. Quote, "The only thing in the world that I want is love, and he doesn't have me, and he doesn't love me." Or, quote, "In the situations there are only two possibilities, and both are equally bad." End quote. The animus never believes in exceptions. One can rarely contradict an animus opinion because it is usually right in a general way. Yet it seldom seems to fit the individual situation. It is apt to be an opinion that seems reasonable but beside the point. Just as the character of a man's enema is shaped by his mother, so the animus is basically influenced by a woman's father. The father endows his daughter's animus with special coloring of unarguable, incontestable, true convictions. Convictions that never include the personal reality of the woman herself as she actually is. This is why the animus is sometimes like the enema, a demon of death. That again is the unconscious side of the woman. If your feminine side is conscious and you move about in society flaunting your femininity, your unconscious is masculine. And it's the opposite for men. If you're masculine consciously, the shadow side of that is going to be feminine, unconscious. just like the opposite of the female, and is molded by this relationship with your mother and early childhood development. The next chapter, the self, the symbol of totality. If an individual has wrestled seriously enough and long enough with the enema or animus problem so that he or she is no longer partially identified with it, the unconscious again changes its dominant character and appears in a new symbolic form, representing the self, the innermost nucleus of the psyche. In the dreams of a woman, this center is usually personified as a superior female figure, a priestess, a sorceress, earth mother, or goddess of nature or love. In the case of a man, it manifests as a masculine initiator and guardian, a wise old man, a spirit of nature, and so forth, like Obi-Wan Kenobi was to Anakin or Luke Skywalker. That, my friends, is just a small little excerpt about the melding of the consciousness with the conscious, the sacred marriage, the image of the hermaphrodite coming together. A male's unconscious, again, is feminine, and the female's unconscious, again, is masculine. These contrary forces, in order to be complete with the self, to be master of thyself, to know thyself, you have to know both of these aspects of your personality, of your psyche. And that is in the process of individuation, which seeks transcendence as its main goal, in order to be that perfect individual, to transcend the animus or the animal or the enema, animal, Elohim, with the spirit of El, animus and anima are Greek again for spirit, and El is short for Elohim, or singular for Elohim, which is Hebrew for the Anunnaki or the Neteru, or angels. I'm giving y'all secrets. I'm divulging sacred knowledge to y'all. I hope this influences y'all to build your characters better, to become better people, to understand who we are, so we can stop these mass murders and crimes amongst each other, killing each other. Killing each other. But anyway, I love y'all. Peace. Another East of Eden Readings production, and I'm out.